Hi, everybody. Welcome to the November 1st, 2019 edition of Colorado Inside Out. I'm your host, Dominic Dezzutti. Thank you very much for joining us. Let's get started with how local school districts handled this week's October surprise snowstorm. Some say the districts closed on the wrong day, and some point to the difficulty of predicting storms like that. Patty Calhoun from Westward, it's pretty easy to Monday morning quarterback this a couple days later, but what did you think of how DPS and the other major districts handled the snow this week?
Well, judging from the screams going up from parents around my office, no one handled it very well because they had just sat down, fired up their computers, and suddenly found out on Tuesday that they had to go get their kids from DPS or they were going to be left out in a snowbank. So DPS didn't actually even hit its own schedule for when they say they're going to close schools. So they might want to have a little refresher course in that.
Michael Fields, Executive Director at Colorado Rising Action. You have a couple little ones yourself. As a parent, how'd you feel the school districts did?
Yeah, I mean, I think, hindsight's 20/20 on these all the time. I've also been working at a school before when they make these decisions. It tends to be groupthink, like what is everybody else doing, and then that, it tends to happen. But I think the early release is the worst thing that can happen because, parents are at work, they have a certain time, they get their kids, now they have to rush and pick them up. So I think it's better always to err on the side of, canceling it early, getting the information out there.
Eric Sodom, political analyst and now weekly columnist at Colorado Politics. Is this kind of a damn if they do, damn if they don't scenario?
I think it is. I don't envy them. I'm glad I'm not in that position. I think Michael's right in the sense that there's a group think and you follow what other districts are doing, et cetera. There's never a right answer, but probably the wrong answer is the midday dismissal. That just complicates everything. I'm not sure it would have been a heck of a lot worse to wait until 3 o'clock as opposed to noon, although the storm was building. And then the other question is, did you need, after the storm had somewhat abated, did you need the snow day on Wednesday? Maybe I'm hopelessly old-fashioned from walking uphill to school both directions in my era. But a little more hardiness. I think we can we're in Colorado, let's cope with a little snow.
Natasha Gardner, articles editor at 5280, also a parent of a little one. What did you think? And maybe this is a good dress rehearsal for what could be a snowy winter?
Well, for me, as someone who grew up in North Dakota, it just felt like a nice fall day all week. So, but perspective maybe comes into play there. As people mentioned, this 2020 vision, we certainly don't hold weather forecasters to the same standards that we apparently are holding our school districts to for predicting storms. But whenever we have the storms, I'm amazed by how much impact schools have on our city, whether that's employers, to the way our streets are plowed, to just what happens to businesses, local businesses, both who benefit and don't benefit from closures like this. Thinking about the teachers who are struggling to get into work because they probably don't live near the school that they do, and we could do a whole show on affordable housing related to that, or the families that need the schools because it provides food for their kids. It's an important place. It's a safe place for their kids during the day. There are so many roles that our school district play, or our schools play within this district. So it's always a good reminder of that. But yes, it was a scramble on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday.
That is a scramble I can relate to on scheduling front for others as well. Election day is Tuesday, and there are some important statewide initiatives on the ballot. Proposition CC would allow the state to retain any surplus tax revenue in perpetuity. Proposition DD would legalize sports betting in Colorado and use the taxes for water development projects. Patty, it took a while for these campaigns to heat up, and I don't know if that's a sign, if it's just a slow season or that's inherent with these propositions. What do you think?
Well, I think the national scene is still taking all the oxygen out of the room, but both DD and CC are beginning to get pretty hotly contested. DD is one where the only clear winner, if it passes, is going to be the gambling towns. We're getting some things for Colorado Water Plan up to $29 million, which would be 10% of the casinos' take on it. But they are clearly the winners. And whenever the casinos go to the ballot box, they seem to really know exactly how to play people. And really, what's the harm for sports betting? Most people want it. It's not going to affect a lot of people. The only people who are really paying for it are the people who lose to the casinos. I'm guessing that'll probably pass. But if you go up to Blackhawk and remember what that town once looked like before limited stakes gambling went in, you can just guess how this will affect those towns. CC is going to be the one that will be a fight to the finish. I don't know if there's been any polling, but people who still like Tabor do not like the idea of it going in perpetuity. And then there are a lot of people who look at the roads that they've been stuck on for the last 5 days and say, we need help here and in higher education.
Michael, you've been a part of a lot of different Proposition CC debates on the no side, if I'm right. How's the attendance been at those debates? What has the reaction been? How's being in the middle of the fight been for you?
Yeah, it's been interesting. It's definitely a race to kind of define this, and without people paying much attention, it has been interesting. I think, in certain areas they're really into it. In Jefferson County, I've done probably half of the debates or forums in Jefferson County, but all over the state there's a lot of interest for the people who are really in tune on one side or the other. I think, the Denver Post had a really good article this week about the ballot language and how important that is for both DD and CC, but especially for CC when it starts without raising taxes. It doesn't say Tabor in it, it doesn't say permanent, it doesn't say refunds. And so I think that makes it so that people are looking into it more last second. Turnout's been interesting so far, pretty low turnout across the board. But I think this is going to be razor tight the way that Ref C was. It was a 4-point margin. Even when Tabor passed, it passed with 53% of the vote. So these votes tend to be pretty close, and I think it could go either way on Election Day. DD, I think momentum is on the pro side. There really isn't an opposition that is coordinated against it. And so I think, you look at it, even with the low turnout, I predict that DD will pass.
Eric, you look at the timing with Proposition CC, and there's part of this that feels to me that there's a lot of strategy and part of being coincidence. It's an off-year election, so there's going to be lower turnout. The campaign for this thing didn't start until, I want to say, like mid-September tops. I mean, it was around this table we talked that it existed, but we really didn't know officially it existed. In fact, we didn't even do a debate here at Channel 12 because we didn't know until the middle of October that it was actually going to be a campaign. That may very well be to its advantage. I don't know if there's someone there, maybe Speaker Becker's thinking this was the plan all along. As you're looking at this so far, what do you think?
Yeah, I wrote a column on it for Colorado Politics a couple weeks ago, and I was pointing out exactly what you did, Dominic, about the low-key nature of this. I believe their, quote, campaign kickoff press conference for the proponents was on October 4th or 5th. I mean, it was an October date. And I commented at the time, when you're doing a kickoff in October, 2 weeks before ballots are going out, there's really not a campaign. My question was, is there sort of a perverse genius behind this? I don't think this was the strategy from the get-go. I think they were forced into the strategy, but it may be a beneficial strategy. I think I'm torn on CC. On DD, I really haven't followed it. I suspect Michael is right. I suspect it passes. Simply because it seems like something for nothing, and there's really not an opposition effort that's funded against it. On CC, on the one hand, you have very favorable ballot language, very attractive ballot language. If people just read the ballot and know nothing else, it is mom and apple pie stuff. On the other side, you have an off-year election and a really sleepy off-year election as they go, with lower turnout, and you have, at least the indications I'm seeing, is an electorate that is much more Republican than is typical than what the electorate is going to be November a year from now. Basically we have a third between Democrats, Republicans, unaffiliated. Right now the Republicans are tracking at about 39% of the ballots. That number will go down as Election Day comes because Democrats tend to vote late, but it may only go down to maybe a 36 number. And if 36% of the universe voting are Republicans, and if it tends to be an older vote, which seems to be the pattern as well, the CC could be in trouble. I think Michael is right, again, in the sense that it's going to be close. It will pass narrowly or it will lose narrowly, and I'm not willing to put money on either side of those right now.
Natasha, I've always said that water is one of the most important issues in Colorado that very few people want to talk about. They want their sprinklers to be able to water their lawn in the summertime and not really worry about it, but it's still a huge issue for us, especially as fast as we're growing. Is that going to help DD pass? Is it more about water and less about sports betting, or do I have it backwards?
Maybe a little bit of both. I think, I've covered water for years now, and the thing that almost automatically when you first talk to somebody who's an expert on water, their first concern is how few people realize how hard it is to get that water way up in the mountains all the way down to our tap. And the amount of effort, whether that's, sometimes federal projects to get that down, state agencies, utilities on a local level. And Colorado has spent a lot of time thinking about that, dating back to the very first days of the state, but even recently with the Colorado Water Plan, the problem is we haven't had a dedicated funding source for that. And that limits projects. It limits the future of that plan. Now, there are plenty of people who have opinions about the plan and whether it should be implemented the way that it's written and what that would look like and what those projects would look like. But this, if DD passes, would be an opportunity to start funding that. But ultimately, I think when people look at that ballot, they don't see water first. I think they see what the wording is about, which is about the bedding.
In addition to the ballot issues, there are a lot of municipal elections on Tuesday's ballot, including the mayoral race in Colorado's third largest city, Aurora. Many school board races are breaking fundraising records, and campaigns have become as contested and dirty as any federal race. Michael, to compare anything to a federal race is not going to be a compliment, so the school board races are in difficult territory. And Aurora is facing a pretty big decision with if it goes partisan, which officially it's not partisan, but you have two Republicans and Mike Hoffman and Ryan Frazier that could split that if they think that way. You have Omar Montgomery. You have a couple other candidates, but it's going to be interesting to find out where that goes. Take your pick of all the different options here. What do you think?
Yeah, well, one, I think that local races are very important, both ballot issue-wise, school board, they make a lot of decisions on the school board level. I used to say, the way school board was happening in Jeffco and Dougco back, 4 or 8 years ago, it was as hard as a Senate campaign to do that. But I think these are the races that impact your life. The interesting thing is, in presidential years, you have 72% of the people that vote. Last year you had 62. This year you might have 33%. And so these issues that really matter to people, not a lot of people vote. But I think in Aurora, that's probably the most interesting one with the mayoral race. It's not it's not a runoff like it is in Denver, and so you just have to get a plurality of the vote. And looking at it, Kaufman is clearly the front runner, but he's well known in that area. But a lot of people don't like him. A lot of people do. There's a lot of strong opinions about him. He's obviously not a Trump fan. And so then you have some of the lower candidates like Marsha Burgeon's going after him, saying, that you're not Trump enough. And then Omar, is a Democrat, but wasn't really a heavy hitter going into this. And this is kind of their option right now. And so he, I think, is picking up steam at the end here. And then Ryan Frazier is well known, in the area too. And so I think it'll be really interesting to see, can anybody go and catch Kaufman during this? But school board are also really interesting in DPS and other places. So I'll be watching the local stuff almost as much as those statewide ballot initiatives.
Eric, a big mayor's race to the east, the school board races breaking all kinds of fundraising records all over town. Take your pick.
I think I'll focus on the Denver school board race, which has become just unbelievably hot, unbelievably nasty, unbelievably expensive. You have a candidate in the southeast Denver district, not even the city at large, and 1/5 of the city, who put in about $350,000 of his own money. To self-fund, I understand self-funders, if you're going to walk, oh, well, let's look at our governor. You spend $20, $30 million and you get to be governor of the state for 4 years. Maybe there's a return on investment there. What is the return on investment on buying a seat? This is a gentleman by the name of Scott Balderman, who's the teacher union candidate in southeast Denver, and he's put in, going on $400,000 total, including what he's given to some other candidates. It boggles the mind. My disgrace last week was some of the mailings that have been put out against a couple of the Latina female Hispanic candidates, Alexis Menacol-Harrigan, Diana Romero-Candle, where they've tried to take away their Latina identity and even anglicize or whitewash their faces to make them look less Latina. It's just despicable stuff. But the fact that these are contested, Denver has been a district that has generally been very reform friendly, and reform candidates have won these seats, not easily, but with not narrow margins for the better part of the last decade or two. And just the fact that the results are unknown now and the battle is really engaged tells you that the tide has churned a little bit in terms of public opinion.
Natasha, looking at the different municipal elections and the school board races, what's the most striking story that's come out in your eyes?
Well, I think that the conversations that started sort of earlier this year with the municipal election in Denver are continuing on a larger area, larger scale in the metro, but also still in Denver as well. And we're seeing that in the school board. As mentioned, the Aurora race is going to be very interesting. I had a chance to interview all those candidates. They have some similarities and a lot of differences as well. One clarification, Ryan Frazier is unaffiliated and has been for a period of time. Looking at the school board race, there's an at-large position, so everyone in Denver is going to have a chance to vote vote for that, and the big topics of reform, what's good, what's works in our school district, charter schools, choice. These are topics that are only rising in urgency in the conversations around town, and they are at the forefront in all of these contests. But then don't forget, there's other language on the ballot as well related to, say, creating this Department of Transportation and a few other minor tweaks. So people may be apathetic in these sort of elections and not go to vote. I have a feeling that people watching the show probably are voting, but maybe this is a reminder to go out there and get some other people to vote, because there are plenty of topics that are going to impact every level of our city and our state on the ballot this year.
Patty, what do all the movers and shakers that you regularly hang out with say that's going to happen with all these different races?
They're saying nothing, I have to say right now. But think about a snowstorm basically got Mayor McNichols out of office, and you wonder how much the snowstorm and the people who were very upset about the school cancellations, non-cancellations, that could actually have an effect on incumbents, especially in the various school districts. The fact that a couple different counties are looking at debrucing measures, more municipalities are looking at debrucing measures, that might have an effect on CC too, because it'll bring some people out to vote who might not have. Aurora is really going to be one to watch. I think it's going to be unlikely that Kaufman is beat, but that will depend a lot on the turnout. The town I'm going to be watching is Lakewood. Don't forget that Lakewood had that big anti-growth thing pass, even though they were incredibly outspent on it by the people who wanted to keep the status quo. That is a suburb that is booming into a city now, not unlike Aurora. And the mayor, who I think is doing a pretty good job, Adam Paul, is being challenged. It's gotten very ugly in Aurora, and that's going to be a big fight on Tuesday.
This week, the U.S. House of Representatives passed the Colorado Outdoor Recreation Economy Act. The act would establish approximately 400,000 acres in Colorado's wilderness, recreation, and conservation areas. The bill highlighted the divide between Colorado's congressional delegation, as no Colorado Republican representatives nor Senator Cory Gardner supported the bill. The bill is unlikely to pass the Senate, and President Trump has already threatened to veto. Eric, we know the fate of the bill already, but it seems that the arguments, I mean, the floor of the House of Representatives was front and center of the really pretty far divide between the Democrats and Republicans that represent the state of Colorado. What did you think from what we saw for the arguments for and against this bill?
Well, first of all, I have to comment on the title of the bill. I think there's a whole new industry out there that, you know, the mom and apple pie, which I already referenced earlier, industry that names these bills. What is it? The Colorado Outdoor Recreation and Economy Act, with a nice acronym of CORE. A lot of people are sort of throwing barbs around of which side of this debate is out of touch. This bill was sponsored by Senator Bennett and Congressman Neguse. And, you know, their supporters would say the opponents, the Scott Tiptons, the Cory Gardners of the world, are just hopelessly out of touch. In my mind, the whole thing is indicative of the divide in this country and the divide in this state. And both sides are representing their constituencies. They just happen to have different constituencies. The constituency in favor of this bill is a lot of outdoor users, outdoor businesses, outdoor industry. And the opponents of this bill are people who believe in multiple uses of these lands, including ranching, including some degree of energy extraction, et cetera. You just have different visions of what this state is and different economic interests as well, and both sides are representing their constituencies.
Natasha, Representative Scott Tipton voted no on this, even though it would have impacted a great deal of his district. Do you think he'll regret that? Is this going to become a voting, an ad issue next year?
I think every point that is mentioned in this act is something we're going to discuss for many, many more years. And then that's how important it is. It makes sense for that reason. We're having lots of conversations in the state right now about how we use land, what we use it for, and even that question of use. It's us taking something from the land and how we interact with it. So all of these conversations are important. What I was relieved to see was that this was news coming out of Washington, D.C. that was so quintessential Colorado. These are the important conversations that we should be talking about at this table. You know, one of the elements in there is designating Camp Hale as a National Historic Landscape. You know, there are just lots of nuggets in this bundle of a very large package, and that's a problem, is the large package has so many different elements, and people are going to disagree with certain elements of that package. But there are some really interesting aspects that I think are worth discussion, hopefully going forward.
Patty, we don't get a lot of bills in D.C. named after Colorado, so this made some headlines, at least here. Are we going to continue to see stories about this as we get into the election season?
Well, of course, Trump will veto it if it passes the Senate because it's going to get in the way of the wall he wants to build in this state. So that'll happen. I'm with Natasha on this Camp Hale thing, which is so fascinating. It would be the first national historic landscape created in the country. The story of Camp Hale is really wonderful. No one can disagree that what happened during World War II when they were training the skiing troops was remarkable. It would be, they've been talking about creating this landscape category for like 8 years, and it's gotten to this point, and you know it's not going to make it through this time, which is too bad. Also in this bill, 200,000 acres that would be taken off for drilling. They would be put off bounds for drilling. That is also a good thing in Colorado, but I don't think we'll see this pass.
Michael, wrap it up for us. Was this a 10% teapot, or is this going to be something bigger next year?
Well, I think it's going to be an ongoing discussion. I don't know how this gets done or if it should get done without Scott Tipton being on board. I think him and Gardner both came out and said that they're open to it if there's certain amendments that are done on it. And I think that's a reasonable position. I think Scott Tipton knows his district really well, knows what's best on this issue. And so I think, you know, if he signed off on something, I think you would see Gardner and perhaps the president, you know, looking at it. But, you know, given where it is right now, the president said he'd veto it, that the Senate's not going to pass it. I think it's back to the House Dems on if they want anything done or nothing done at all. And so I think this will, continue on next year and maybe into the future.
Let's get to our favorite part of the show, Disgrace of the Week. As always, Ms. Calhoun, please start us off.
The long-awaited report on the explosion in Firestone, which showed that that flow line they built the subdivision knowing full well that had not been capped, it had not been cut off. We're going to have flow line discussions coming up with the Oil and Gas Commission pretty soon, and people, including the widow of who lost her brother and her husband in that explosion and has had, 27 surgeries. Aaron Martinez says it's time not just to cap these flow lines, but to pull them out altogether once they're obsolete.
Michael.
Proponents of the National Popular Vote raised $750,000 over this last reporting period, 97% of which came from out of state, mostly California. And so I thought it was interesting that the whole claim was we don't want to give our vote away to California, and then all the money came in from there. So I don't know who thought of that, but it wasn't a good idea.
Eric.
I'll make myself the disgrace of the week here on the show 7 days ago. We were joking. I think the quick take topic was about Donald Trump's Colorado wall. And I ventured to thought that, you know, maybe we shouldn't jump to conclusions that it's a wall on our southern border. Maybe it's a wall to keep Wyoming folks out of Colorado. I mentioned that our good friend, former person around this table, Dan Haley, was a Wyoming guy who maybe we were wanting to keep out of the state. I was wrong about that. Dan is a proud Denver native who just has a particular affinity for Wyoming and particularly University of Wyoming football. So I'm a purveyor of fake news.
Natasha.
In the worst sort of not fake news, waking up this morning, there were reports in Chicago of a 7-year-old who was shot while out trick-or-treating. Gun violence in this country is a conversation we consistently have around this table. A 7-year-old getting shot on any day is an awful, awful thing, but on a holiday that's truly about the spirit of kids being able to go out and the tricks and the treats and all that fun, it's just a really sad headline.
Time to say something nice about somebody. Patty?
Well, let me just quickly add on the wall. I spoke to Tom Tancredo, former denizen at this table, who is now involved with the We Build the Wall campaign down on the border. And he suggested that he would be all for a border, not around Colorado, but blocking, not Wyoming's okay, New Mexico's okay, blocking off California. But that is not that's not my nice. That's just an addition. It's Denver Arts Week, start of Denver Arts Week. Lots of great events, including free night at the museums on November 2nd, which is a great way to see many, many places around town. And also Day of the Dead today and tomorrow. But get down to Santa Fe Drive. It's really a remarkable spot.
Michael.
There's legislation coming next year to change our license plates back to the green mountains and white sky. It might be a small thing, but I do like that one a little bit more, so I wanted to give credit to the legislators bringing that forward.
Going old school, I like it. Eric.
How about the World Series? That was fun.
Here.
Great World Series, 7 games. The underdogs won, and happy birthday to my mother, 92 years old, Marion Sonderman, a regular viewer of this program. Happy birthday.
Well, happy birthday to Eric's mom. That's fantastic. And it was cool at the World Series. I saw this. Out of all the different sports that go to 7 games, hockey, baseball, and basketball, 1,400 series have taken place. Not one of them until now where all the road teams won. Kind of crazy. Natasha.
All the attention that has come out in recent weeks about Justina Ford, Denver's first black female physician. I mean, talking about a woman who has had an impact on this city. She delivered nearly 7,000 babies. So if you just sort of extrapolate upon their families and the influence that has had on this town, it's amazing. But last week, too, I had an out-of-town guest, and I took him to the Molly Brown house. I'm a big fan of Margaret Brown. Everyone pretty much knows that already. But one of the things I told him is that the reason that was important to me was that as a girl visiting there, it was a museum dedicated to a woman, and how cool that was, and how thankful I was that we live in a time where that's not so unusual anymore. So love that she's getting the attention that she deserves, and that museum's going to have some more funds.
And that they have a really cool Christmas thing. You can go there, they can have a kind of seasonal change in the Molly Brown house, so I can't echo that enough. I think that's a great point. A couple of things before we go tonight. First, the bad weather this week canceled both sides of the tapings, both sides of the story tapings. As try as we may, it got a little crazy. So the semifinals officially begin next Friday. They were going to start earlier tonight. They'll begin next Friday with Rhea Scaria from Mountain Vista and Haley Stotts from Eagle Crest as they debate if Colorado Public Schools should have armed guards present throughout the school day. Also, I want to remind everybody that Colorado Gives Day is December 10th, and now it's all the lines are open, and you can officially schedule your gift to CPT 12 right now. You count on us for great programming like Colorado Inside Out, and hopefully we count on you for your support for Colorado Gives Day. Go to cpt12.org for details. And again, thank you so much for your support of us throughout the year, but we count on your support for Colorado Gives Day, and we're hoping that you'll be able to say, yeah, I like to see the different programs like Colorado Inside Out. Maybe you're even fans of Devil's Advocate with John Caldera. I know at least he is, so he's out there maybe thinking about that. But all the different programs that we do here, whether it's street level, Sounds on 29th, or all the great PBS programs that you tune in for are all made possible by you. So thank you for your support in making that happen. And please do go to cpt12.org for more details. For everybody here at CPT 12, I'm Dominic Dezzutti. Thank you so much for watching. Good night.